Sarah Mitchell was already having a difficult morning when she rushed into the courthouse at 9:45 a.m. Her chef's coat was still on, covered by a hastily thrown-on blazer, and her hair was pulled back in a neat but simple bun. The smell of garlic and herbs still clung to her clothes from the early morning prep work she had been doing before this unexpected court appearance. The courthouse hallway was busy with people moving in and out of different courtrooms. Sarah's footsteps echoed on the polished floor as she searched for courtroom 3B. She had never wanted to be here in the first place, but a parking ticket from 3 weeks ago had turned into something more serious when she missed the payment deadline due to her hectic schedule running 3 restaurants. When she finally found the right courtroom, Sarah quietly opened the heavy wooden door and slipped inside. The room was smaller than she expected, with dark wood panels on the walls and rows of benches that were already half full with other people waiting for their cases to be called. Judge Richard Harrison sat high above everyone else, his gray hair neatly combed and his black robe perfectly pressed. His face showed no emotion as he worked through the morning's cases. Sarah noticed how he barely looked at the people standing before him, focused instead on the papers on his desk. Case number 247, Sarah Mitchell, the court clerk called out in a monotone voice. Sarah stood up, her chef's clogs squeaking slightly on the floor. As she walked to the front of the courtroom, she could feel Judge Harrison's eyes on her. His expression changed slightly when he saw her outfit, a mix of confusion and disapproval crossing his face. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Harrison said, looking down at her over his reading glasses, "You're here for an unpaid parking violation from March 15th. The original fine was $150, which has now increased to $300 due to late payment. How do you plead?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I can explain. That morning, one of my main food suppliers had an emergency." "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice sharp. "I asked how you plead, not for an explanation of your morning schedule." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "Guilty, Your Honor, but I would like to explain the circumstances." Judge Harrison's frown deepened. "The circumstances, Ms. Mitchell, are that you parked your vehicle in a loading zone for over 2 hours. The circumstances are that you failed to pay the fine within the required time frame, and now you appear in my courtroom dressed as if you'd just come from a kitchen." Several people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm, but she kept her head high. "Your Honor, I am a chef, and this morning there was an emergency at my rest." "Being a cook does not excuse you from following the law, Ms. Mitchell," Judge Harrison cut in again. "Nor does it excuse you from showing proper respect for this court." He shuffled some papers on his desk, not seeing how Sarah's eyes flashed at being called just a cook. "Given your disregard for both parking regulations and court procedures," Judge Harrison continued, "I am imposing the maximum fine of $500, plus court costs. This must be paid within 30 days, or you will face additional penalties. Do you understand?" Sarah's hands tightened into fists at her sides, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, Your Honor." "Next case," Judge Harrison called out, already looking past her to the papers for his next case. Sarah turned and walked back down the aisle, keeping her steps measured and calm despite the anger bubbling inside her. As she pushed open the courtroom door, she heard the clerk calling out another case number, and life in courtroom 3B continued as if nothing significant had happened. In the hallway, Sarah finally let out the breath she had been holding. She pulled out her phone and saw 5 missed calls from her sous chef. The morning's supplier crisis still needed her attention, and now she had a $500 fine to deal with as well. But as she walked toward the courthouse exit, her mind was already turning to something else: the charity gala she would be catering next month, where she knew a certain judge would be attending as a guest of honor. A small smile appeared on Sarah's face. Sometimes life had a way of creating interesting opportunities for people to learn important lessons. As she pushed open the heavy courthouse doors and stepped out into the bright morning sunlight, Sarah knew that this story was far from over. Judge Harrison had no idea who she really was, but he would find out soon enough. Later that same day, Sarah walked through the busy kitchen of her flagship restaurant, Heritage. The sounds of sizzling pans and chopping knives filled the air as her team prepared for the evening service. The morning's court appearance felt like a distant memory now that she was back in her element. "Chef Marcus," her sous chef, called out as she entered, "the supplier crisis is fixed. We got the special truffles for tonight's VIP table, and they're even better quality than usual. He held up a small wooden box containing black truffles that had cost more than some people's weekly salary. Sarah smiled, remembering how this morning's parking ticket had happened because she had rushed to meet the backup truffle supplier when their regular one had called in with bad news. The $500 fine still bothered her, but at least she had saved the special dinner she had planned for tonight. Perfect timing, Sarah said, taking the box from Marcus. We have food critics coming from the Star magazine tonight. They're trying to be sneaky about it, but my friend at the reservation desk recognized the name. The kitchen staff straightened up at this news. Heritage already had 2 Michelin stars, and everyone knew they were close to getting their third. Sarah had worked 15 years to get to this point, starting as a dishwasher and slowly working her way up through some of the toughest kitchens in the city. As she checked the evening's reservations, her phone buzzed. It was an email from the city's most prestigious event planning company. They wanted to confirm the final menu for next month's charity gala. Sarah smiled as she read through the guest list again. Judge Harrison's name was still there, listed as one of the guests of honor. Chef, you need to see this. Jenny, one of her line cooks, rushed over with her phone. She was showing a food blog that had just posted an article about the city's top chefs. Sarah's picture was at the top of the list, with the headline, Sarah Mitchell, the Queen of Modern Cuisine. The article praised her 3 restaurants, especially Heritage. It talked about how she had changed the city's food scene, mixing traditional flavors with modern techniques. The writer described her as a culinary genius who rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most respected chefs in the country. Sarah handed the phone back to Jenny, remembering how different things had been just a few years ago. When she first tried to open Heritage, many banks wouldn't give her a loan. They didn't believe a young black woman could run a high-end restaurant. But she had proved them wrong, just like she had proved wrong everyone else who had doubted her. Look at these reservation numbers, Marcus said, showing her the tablet with the restaurant's booking system. We're fully booked for the next 3 months. The waiting list is getting crazy. Sarah nodded, feeling proud but also remembering all the hard work it had taken to get here. Her first restaurant had started small, with just a few tables. She had worked 18-hour days, cooking every dish herself. Now she owned 3 successful restaurants and had more than 60 people working for her. As she walked through her kitchen, checking dishes and tasting sauces, Sarah thought about Judge Harrison's dismissive attitude. He had called her just a cook, not knowing that food magazines regularly featured her recipes or that famous people often waited weeks to eat at her restaurants. Chef, the food critics are here, Marcus whispered urgently, peeking out from the kitchen door. Table 7. They tried to come in separately, but I recognized both of them. Sarah straightened her chef's coat and adjusted her hat. Okay, everyone, this is what we do best. Let's show them why Heritage deserves that 3rd star. The kitchen came alive with renewed energy. Flames leaped from the stoves, and the smell of perfectly cooked food filled the air. Sarah moved from station to station, making sure every dish was perfect. This was her world, where she was in complete control, where her talent and hard work spoke louder than any prejudices. As she put the final touches on the critic's first course, a delicate truffle-infused dish that had become one of her signatures, Sarah thought about the upcoming charity gala. Soon, Judge Harrison would see her in a very different light. But for now, she had a kitchen to run and critics to impress. The night was young, and Sarah Mitchell, the chef that some people underestimated, was about to remind everyone why she was at the top of her game. 2 weeks had passed since the courtroom incident, and the Grand Plaza Hotel's largest ballroom was buzzing with activity. The charity gala was just hours away, and Sarah's team was transforming the kitchen into a high-end operation. This event would host 300 of the city's most influential people, including Judge Harrison. Everything must be perfect tonight, Sarah told her staff as they set up their stations. She had personally designed a special 7-course menu that would show off her best dishes. The event organizers had kept her identity a secret, advertising only that a mysterious celebrated chef would be preparing the dinner. Marcus walked in carrying a clipboard with the final guest list. Chef, I've marked the table arrangements. Judge Harrison is sitting at table 1, right in front of the stage where you'll be introduced. Sarah nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. She was wearing her finest chef's coat today, crisp white with her name elegantly embroidered in gold thread. It was a far cry from the casual kitchen clothes she had worn to traffic court. "Did you see the morning news?" Jenny asked, showing Sarah her phone. The local TV station had run a story about Heritage getting its third Michelin star. The announcement had come just yesterday, making Sarah the first black woman chef in the city to achieve this honor. As Sarah checked the timing for each course, she noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Not from nervousness about cooking. She could do that in her sleep. No, she was thinking about the moment when Judge Harrison would realize who she was. "Chef, the flowers for the garnishes just arrived," called out Tommy, one of her junior chefs. He was carrying boxes of edible flowers in every color imaginable. Sarah had ordered them specially for tonight's dessert, a creation she called Garden of Dreams. The kitchen staff moved with precision as they prepared components for each dish. The first course would be a delicate soup served in tiny glass bowls that looked like floating clouds. The second would be her famous truffle dish that had impressed the food critics 2 weeks ago. "Time check," Sarah called out. 3 hours until guests arrive. Let's do a final run-through of every course." As her team practiced plating each dish, Sarah stepped into the ballroom to see the final decorations. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and each table was set with fine china and silver. At table 1, she saw the name card, Honorable Judge Richard Harrison. Sarah remembered his dismissive tone in the courtroom, how he hadn't even let her explain herself. Tonight would be different. Tonight, she would let her food do the talking. Back in the kitchen, the pace was picking up. Sauces simmered, bread baked in the ovens, and delicate decorations were carefully arranged on serving plates. Sarah tasted everything personally, making small adjustments to ensure each flavor was perfect. "First guests arriving in 1 hour," Marcus announced. The kitchen staff moved faster, their movements sure and practiced. Sarah had trained them well, and tonight they would help her show everyone why she was considered one of the best chefs in the country. "Chef, look what just came in," Jenny said, handing Sarah an envelope. It was from the mayor's office, an invitation to cater the upcoming International Business Conference. Sarah smiled. Her reputation was growing bigger every day, while Judge Harrison still thought of her as someone who didn't deserve respect in his courtroom. The event coordinator stuck her head through the kitchen door. "Chef Mitchell, we've added your introduction to the program, right after the first 3 courses, before the main dish. Is that timing okay?" "Perfect," Sarah replied. She had planned it carefully. By then, the guests would have already tasted enough of her food to be impressed, but there would still be more surprises to come. As the final hour approached, Sarah gathered her team around her. "Tonight isn't just about serving food," she told them. "It's about showing people that excellence can come from anywhere, and that you should never judge someone without knowing their full story." The kitchen staff nodded, understanding the importance of the evening. They had all heard about what happened in traffic court, and they were eager to help Sarah prove herself. The first guests would be arriving soon. Sarah straightened her chef's coat one last time and looked around her temporary kitchen. Everything was ready. Soon, Judge Harrison would learn that the woman he had dismissed so easily in his courtroom was about to serve him the meal of his life. The Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom was filled with the city's elite. Judge Harrison sat at table 1, dressed in an expensive black suit, occasionally nodding to other important guests he recognized. The first 3 courses of the mystery chef's menu had left everyone amazed, and conversations about the food filled the elegant room. "Simply extraordinary," said the woman sitting next to Judge Harrison. She was the city's most respected food critic. "This level of cooking, I have my suspicions about who it might be, but the organizers are keeping it quite secret." Judge Harrison carefully wiped his mouth with the silk napkin. He had just finished the 3rd course, a perfectly cooked scallop dish that seemed to melt in his mouth. "I must admit," he said, "I've never tasted anything quite like this. Whoever this chef is, they certainly know their craft." The event coordinator stepped onto the stage, tapping her glass gently with a spoon. The room gradually fell silent as everyone turned to look at her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "I hope you've enjoyed our first 3 courses this evening." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Several people held up their phones, ready to capture the moment everyone had been waiting for, the revelation of the mystery chef's identity. "Tonight's menu has been created and prepared by someone very special," the coordinator continued. a chef who has recently made history by becoming the first black woman in our city to earn 3 Michelin stars. Someone who believes that food can break down barriers and bring people together. Judge Harrison leaned forward, interested. He had read something about this achievement in the morning paper, but hadn't paid much attention to the details. Please join me in welcoming, the coordinator paused for effect, the incredible talent behind tonight's extraordinary meal, Chef Sarah Mitchell. The ballroom erupted in applause as Sarah stepped onto the stage. She wore her professional chef's coat, now decorated with 3 small stars on the collar representing her latest achievement. Her head was held high, and a confident smile graced her face. Judge Harrison's hand, which had been raising his wineglass to his lips, froze midway. His eyes widened as recognition dawned on his face. The woman standing on stage, receiving a standing ovation from the city's most distinguished guests, was the same person he had dismissed so quickly in his courtroom just weeks ago. Sarah scanned the room as she spoke about her passion for cooking and her journey to success. Her eyes briefly met Judge Harrison's, and she noticed how he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Cooking is about more than just food, Sarah said into the microphone. It's about breaking down prejudices. It's about proving that excellence can come from unexpected places. Every dish tells a story, and tonight, I hope my food has told you mine. More applause filled the room. The food critic at Judge Harrison's table was practically glowing with excitement. Of course, she exclaimed. I should have known it was Sarah Mitchell. That truffle dish is her signature. She's absolutely brilliant. Judge Harrison barely heard her. He was lost in his memories of the courtroom, remembering how he had cut Sarah off, how he had dismissed her as just a cook. Now here she was, celebrated by everyone in the room, clearly at the top of her profession. As Sarah concluded her speech, she announced the next course. I hope you enjoy the main dish of the evening, a special creation I call Just as Served. A subtle smile played on her lips as she said this, and her eyes once again found Judge Harrison's. The judge watched as perfectly plated dishes emerged from the kitchen. Each plate was a work of art, with elements balanced so beautifully it almost seemed a shame to disturb them. As he tasted the dish, he couldn't help but think about how wrong his assumptions had been. Sarah returned to her kitchen, where her team was already preparing the final courses. Through the kitchen door, she could see Judge Harrison at his table, his expression thoughtful as he ate her food. Chef, Marcus whispered, did you see his face when you walked out? Sarah nodded, focusing on plating the next course. Sometimes, she said quietly, the best way to change someone's mind is to let your work speak for itself. As the gala dinner was coming to an end, Sarah decided it was time for a conversation she had been planning for weeks. She removed her chef's coat, revealing an elegant black dress underneath, and made her way through the ballroom. People stopped her every few steps to compliment her food, but her eyes were fixed on table 1. Judge Harrison was sitting alone now, slowly finishing his dessert. Most other guests had moved to the bar area for after-dinner drinks. He looked up as Sarah approached, and for the first time in his career, the judge seemed at a loss for words. Good evening, Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice calm and professional. I hope you enjoyed your meal tonight. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, smoothing her dress as she did so. The judge put down his dessert spoon carefully. Ms. Mitchell, he said, his voice quieter than it had been in the courtroom. Your food was exceptional, truly exceptional. He paused, struggling to find the right words. I believe I owe you an apology. Sarah looked at him steadily. Actually, Your Honor, I'd like to invite you to see something first. Would you join me for a quick tour of the kitchen? She gestured toward the double doors where her staff was still working. Judge Harrison hesitated for a moment, then nodded. As they walked toward the kitchen, several people tried to stop Sarah to praise her cooking, but she politely excused herself. This conversation was more important. The kitchen was still buzzing with activity. Staff members were cleaning up, packing equipment, and preparing take-home gifts for the guests. Everyone straightened up when Sarah and the judge entered. This is my world, Your Honor, Sarah said, leading him through the busy kitchen. The day I appeared in your court, I had rushed there straight from handling a crisis here. Supplier had failed to deliver crucial ingredients for a special event. 60 people's jobs depended on me solving that problem. She showed him the different stations, the hotline where main courses were prepared, the pastry section where delicate desserts were crafted, the plating area where each dish was turned into a work of art. When you called me just a cook, Sarah continued, watching his face carefully, you made a judgment without knowing anything about me, about my 3 restaurants, my Michelin stars, or the fact that I employ over 60 people. Judge Harrison's face reddened slightly. Ms. Mitchell, I was completely wrong in how I treated you. My behavior was biased, Sarah suggested, raising an eyebrow. Prejudiced, perhaps. The judge nodded slowly. Yes, he admitted. I made assumptions based on how you were dressed and other factors. I didn't give you the respect you deserved as a person appearing in my court. Sarah picked up a clean spoon and handed it to him. Taste this, she said, leading him to a pot of sauce simmering on the stove. This is what I was working on the morning of my court appearance. The judge tasted the sauce, and his eyes widened. This is incredible, he said softly. That sauce takes 3 days to make properly, Sarah explained. I was about to lose the main ingredient for it when I got that parking ticket, but you didn't want to hear that explanation. Around them, the kitchen staff pretended not to listen, but everyone was watching from the corners of their eyes. This was a moment they would talk about for years to come. You know, Your Honor, Sarah continued, every day in your courtroom, you see people for just a few minutes. You make quick decisions about their lives, their circumstances, their character. Tonight, I wanted to show you that there's always more to someone's story than what you see in those few minutes. Judge Harrison looked around the kitchen, then back at Sarah. In this environment, she radiated authority and excellence. It was a far cry from the rushed, harried woman he had dismissed so easily in his courtroom. Miss Mitchell, he said finally, would you be willing to sit down with me properly? I think there's a lot I could learn from your experience. The next evening, Sarah welcomed Judge Harrison to Heritage, her flagship restaurant. She had chosen to meet him after regular hours when the dining room was quiet and empty. The usual buzz of dinner service was replaced by a peaceful calm, with only soft lighting illuminating the elegant space. I wanted you to see where it all started, Sarah said, gesturing for the judge to sit at a corner table. The restaurant's walls were decorated with framed reviews and awards, telling the story of her journey to success. Judge Harrison looked around, taking in the sophisticated atmosphere. This is quite different from our last 2 meetings, he said with a hint of embarrassment in his voice. He was dressed casually now, without his judicial robes and the stern expression he wore in court. Sarah called to Marcus, who brought out 2 plates of food. This is the first dish I ever created when I was starting out, she explained. Back then, I was working as a dishwasher in a small diner, but I would experiment with recipes during my breaks. The judge took a bite then smiled appreciatively. It's delicious. How did you go from dishwashing to owning 3 restaurants? Sarah sat back in her chair, remembering those early days. It wasn't easy. When I tried to get my first loan, 15 banks turned me down. Some didn't even look at my business plan when they saw me walk in. Others suggested I try opening a soul food restaurant instead of fine dining. She pointed to a small frame on the wall, her first review, from when Heritage had just opened. I had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. Every day, I dealt with people who took one look at me and decided what I could or couldn't do. The judge set down his fork, looking troubled. Like I did in my courtroom, he said quietly. Sarah nodded. Exactly. But here's the interesting thing. Every time someone underestimated me, it just made me work harder. When people said I couldn't do fine dining, I studied French cuisine for 18 hours a day. When they said I wouldn't get any Michelin stars, I practiced the same dishes hundreds of times until they were perfect. Marcus brought out another course, and Sarah explained how each element on the plate told part of her story. The sauce was inspired by her grandmother's recipes, while the modern presentation reflected her formal culinary training. You know what's funny? Sarah continued, watching the judge taste the food. The day I appeared in your court, I was actually solving a problem that could have affected dozens of people's jobs. That parking ticket happened because I had to meet an emergency supplier when our regular one had a crisis. I was trying to protect my employees' livelihoods. Judge Harrison put down his fork. And I never gave you the chance to explain that. I just saw. You saw what you expected to see, Sarah finished for him. A black woman in casual clothes, probably making excuses for breaking the rules. You didn't see a business owner, an employer, or a chef with 3 Michelin stars. The judge was quiet for a moment, thinking about her words. How many others have I misjudged? He finally asked, more to himself than to Sarah. How many stories have I failed to hear? Sarah leaned forward. That's exactly why I wanted to have this conversation. It's not just about me or that parking ticket. It's about all the people who come through your courtroom. Everyone has a story, Your Honor. Everyone deserves a chance to tell it. She stood up and walked to a shelf near their table, returning with a thick folder. These are letters from young people I've mentored over the years. Kids from tough backgrounds who now work in some of the best restaurants in the country. They succeeded because someone took the time to look past first impressions and really see their potential. Judge Harrison opened the folder, reading some of the letters. Each one told a story of transformation, of opportunities given and lives changed. Ms. Mitchell, he said finally, looking up from the letters, would you be willing to help me do better? Perhaps you could speak to other judges about your experience. Help us understand how our biases affect the decisions we make. Sarah smiled, seeing the genuine desire for change in his eyes. I think that's a conversation worth having, Your Honor. But first, let me show you our kitchen. There's a whole world back there that might surprise you. 1 month after their dinner at Heritage, Sarah stood before a different kind of audience. Instead of food critics and dinner guests, she faced a room full of judges at the city courthouse's annual judicial training conference. Judge Harrison had invited her as the keynote speaker, and her story had drawn the largest attendance in the event's history. Before I begin, Sarah said, standing confidently at the podium, I'd like to serve you something. She nodded to Marcus and Jenny, who began distributing small covered plates to each judge in the room. Some of the judges exchanged confused looks. This was certainly not a typical conference presentation. Under each cover, you'll find the same dish, Sarah continued. It's a simple appetizer I created years ago. But here's the interesting part. Half of you have it served on fine china, while the others have it on basic white plates. The judges uncovered their plates, and a murmur went through the room. The same dish looked completely different depending on its presentation. The food on the fine china somehow seemed more sophisticated, more professional. Now close your eyes and taste it, Sarah instructed. The room fell silent as the judges followed her direction. Notice how your expectations might have been influenced by the presentation. This is exactly what happens in your courtrooms every day. Judge Harrison, sitting in the front row, nodded encouragingly. He had spent the past month reviewing his own cases, shocked to discover patterns in how he treated different defendants based on their appearance. When I appeared in traffic court last month, Sarah continued, I was wearing my work clothes, a chef's coat and comfortable shoes. I was treated very differently than I was last night when I visited the same court wearing a business suit. The person was the same. The story was the same. Only the presentation changed. She clicked to the next slide, showing pictures of her 3 restaurants, her Michelin stars, and her team of 60 employees. Success doesn't always wear a suit, she said. Sometimes it wears chef's clogs or work boots or scrubs. Justice shouldn't depend on packaging. After her speech, several judges approached Sarah with questions and comments. One older judge admitted he had never thought about how something as simple as clothing could influence his decisions. Another asked if she would consider regular speaking engagements at judicial training sessions. Judge Harrison walked up last, after the others had left. That was powerful, he said. Especially the part with the plates. Sometimes the best lessons come through the stomach. Sarah smiled. Food has a way of bringing truth to the table, she agreed. By the way, how is the new program going? The program had been Judge Harrison's idea, an initiative to have local business owners sit in court sessions and provide feedback on how judges' behavior and decisions might be influenced by unconscious bias. Sarah had helped design it, drawing on her experiences both as a defendant and a successful businesswoman. We've already had 12 business owners participate, Judge Harrison replied. Their observations have been eye-opening. One pointed out how differently we speak to people based on their jobs. Another noticed we tend to rush through cases right before lunch. Sarah's phone buzzed, a message from Marcus about a special reservation at Heritage. Speaking of lunch, she said, checking the message, you'll never guess who's dining at my restaurant today. The chief judge of the appeals court. Judge Harrison laughed. Word gets around. Your food has become quite the talk of the courthouse, but more importantly, your story has started something significant. 3 other court districts have contacted me about implementing similar training programs. Sarah thought about how much had changed since that morning in traffic court. Her parking ticket, which Judge Harrison had insisted on dismissing, though she had refused and paid it anyway, had sparked a conversation that was now reaching far beyond one courtroom. Change happens in unexpected ways, she said, gathering her presentation materials. Sometimes it takes a traffic ticket and a fancy dinner to open people's eyes. As she walked out of the courthouse, Sarah passed the traffic court where her story had begun. Through the door, she could hear a judge patiently listening to someone explaining why they couldn't pay their fine right away. The judge's voice was kind, understanding. Small changes, Sarah thought, but important ones. Sometimes the path to justice started in the most unlikely places, even in a busy kitchen on a hectic morning. 1 year later, Heritage Restaurant was busier than ever. Sarah stood in her kitchen, watching as her team prepared for a very special evening. The restaurant was hosting a celebration dinner for the first graduating class of the Justice Serve program, an initiative that had grown far beyond what she or Judge Harrison had initially imagined. The program, which had started with their chance encounter, now operated in 15 cities across the country. It paired judges with local business owners from diverse backgrounds, creating opportunities for understanding that went far beyond traditional sensitivity training. "Chef," Marcus called out, "Judge Harrison is here early. He's asking if you have a minute to taste something." Sarah smiled and walked to the dining room. Over the past year, the judge had become not just an ally in changing the justice system, but also an enthusiastic amateur cook. He had started taking cooking classes at a local community college, saying it helped him understand the importance of not judging things at first glance. "Your Honor." Sarah greeted him, seeing him standing proudly next to a covered dish. "What have you brought us today?" "Please, it's Richard now," he reminded her with a smile. "And this is my attempt at that sauce you showed me last year, the one that takes 3 days to make." Sarah lifted the cover and tasted the sauce carefully. It wasn't quite the same as her version, but it had its own charm. "Not bad," she said. "You're learning." "Just like I'm learning in the courtroom," he replied. "You know, yesterday I had a young man appear before me for a traffic violation. Before your program, I might have just rushed through the case, but I asked him to explain his situation. Turns out he was rushing his pregnant wife to the hospital." Sarah nodded, remembering her own experience in his courtroom a year ago. "And what did you do?" "Dismissed the ticket and had my clerk call the hospital to check on them. They had a healthy baby girl this morning." He paused. Sometimes justice needs a human touch. The restaurant was starting to fill up with the evening's special guests, judges and business owners from across the city who had participated in the program. Sarah saw Jenny escorting people to their tables, proudly wearing her new So's chef uniform. She had been promoted last month, part of Sarah's ongoing commitment to helping others climb the ladder of success. "Chef," Tommy called from the kitchen, "the TV crew is here for the interview." The local news station was doing a feature story about the Justice Serve program. They wanted to film Sarah and Judge Harrison in the kitchen, showing how their unlikely partnership had started a national movement for change in the justice system. As the camera crew set up, Sarah looked around her restaurant. The walls now held not just cooking awards, but also recognition for her work in judicial reform. Last month, she had been invited to speak at the National Judicial Conference, where she had received a standing ovation. "Ready for the interview?" Judge Harrison asked, straightening his apron. He had insisted on wearing it for the camera, saying it represented his own journey of learning and change. "Almost," Sarah replied. She walked to her office and returned with a framed document, her original parking ticket from that fateful day. She had kept it as a reminder of how unexpected moments could lead to extraordinary change. The interview began, with Sarah and Judge Harrison working side by side in the kitchen while telling their story. They showed how cooking required the same things that justice did: patience, attention to detail, and the willingness to look beyond surface appearances. "And what's next for the Justice Serve program?" the reporter asked. Sarah looked at Judge Harrison, then back at the camera. "We're launching a scholarship program," she announced, "for young people from underserved communities who want to attend law school or culinary school. because sometimes the best way to change the system is to change who's in it. As the evening wound down, Sarah watched the dining room full of judges and business owners talking, laughing, and sharing stories over good food. This was what she had always believed, that food could bring people together, break down barriers, and open minds. Judge Harrison raised his glass in a toast. To Sarah Mitchell, he said, who taught an old judge new tricks and showed us all that justice, like cooking, is an art that requires both skill and heart. Sarah smiled, thinking of how far they'd come from that morning in traffic court. Sometimes the best recipes for change included unexpected ingredients, like a parking ticket, a judge's prejudice, and a chef's determination to make a difference.